All right, so how's it going, y'all? It's Will, and I'm here with John, who you might remember from the last few podcasts, and also with John's friend Andrey, who I've been told is also a spiritual seeker, a guy who's interested in, the big picture and what's going on out there. So we thought we'd have him on and kind of just see what's up. How you doing, Andrey?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So kind of something that we like to start out with is just to kind of talk a little bit about spiritual background and kind of like where we're coming from, because we find that how you grow up tends to affect kind of your path later on. So for example, I was originally a Presbyterian Christian as a child, and then I left. I went to atheism, then went all around the map, started exploring all kinds of crazy stuff, took psychedelic drugs and explored that kind of stuff. And then eventually I came back and became an Orthodox Christian. And so how about yourself? Like, what's your kind of background?
Well, actually, I grew up in Russia until I was about 13 years old. So yes, it was either you're an atheist or you're an Orthodox Christian. So it's interesting that you say that, but my family was completely atheistic. Like atheism was a religion. My dad's an engineer, and he was very anti anything that doesn't adhere to the scientific norm. And that was my upbringing as well. And so when I moved to the US when I was 13, and then I went to college as an engineer, I studied mechanical engineering, and I was basically mimicking that well into my late 20s. The only thing close to a sort of a religious belief or experience I actually had was, interestingly enough, with string theory. It's a physical concept, and I was really into like these scientific discoveries, and I was really like kind of believing in science, you can say. And so for me, when I came across this concept of string theory, which I don't know how much you guys know about this, but it's basically a theory of the universe that explains everything. Well, not everything, but it explains all the physical forces. So it explains, for example, why gravity is so weak compared to electromagnetism, right? Because gravity is, you get a whole planetary gravity acting on this little magnet, and this little magnet can counteract this whole entire force, right? So I'm not going to get into details, but basically the theory is some guy messing around with this math equation that postulated that actually we're living in 11 dimensions, and gravity is not bound to these 3 dimensions, but the other forces are, and so that's what's causing this disparity. And there's all these other crazy.
So that had like spiritual implications for you?
So this was the first time where something blew my mind, right? Because before it was like, okay, science. I believe in science. Everything can be explained, and suddenly, this is still science. People are researching this, like smart people, physicists, people that I believe in, right? And then this is what they come up with, like 11 dimensions. Nobody can quite wrap their head around it. And I was also, there's this one movie, actually, a documentary called The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene, that I watched one time after smoking a lot of cannabis. And this was probably the beginning where my mind took a beating. It took, okay, so things are not as they seem. And in this sort of realm. Before, I did hallucinogenics before as well, but this was like in this framework that this is the real world, right?
It was kind of like giving scientific reason to believe that there's more in the universe than what we can see and touch and feel. Is that right?
Yes, you can say that. So up until that point, my experiences with hallucinogenics and MDMA and mushrooms and acid and this sort of things, yes, the mind was also blown, but it's like, okay, so this is hallucinogenics and this is real life. There's not really any intersection between them, right? But this was the first time that there was an intersection between it. And so this was the first time that something's like, wow, there's something that I cannot comprehend. And there's something that science cannot comprehend. So this was really the first time, and this was probably my 19 or 20 years old. But it took me another probably 8 years before actually get into, spirituality as we talk about it, and as we, as kind of the definition or whatever, where my mind was blown once again, but by something entirely different, and it was more of this spiritual context to it. So yeah, and after that, everything changed.
So are you saying that for you, hallucinogenics were like kind of a gateway back into spiritual exploration?
Yeah, I think so. Like, Will, you mentioned that for you the backbone was this sort of, being raised as an Orthodox Christian, right? I didn't have this backbone.
I wasn't raised Orthodox. I was raised Protestant. Yeah.
Protestant, right. But you had this sort of religious backbone, anyways. I didn't really have that. So for me, it was experiential. So I think for me the biggest thing was I was always seeking this experience. And so for me, before any spirituality came, this experience of having my mind blown had to happen first. And I started actively seeking it out.
When you say you had your mind blown, was that kind of related to like your ego at all?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, everything mind related has to do with ego anyways, right? So when we are talking about this, we're also talking about ego, I think, as well.
I'm kind of wondering if that was like maybe kind of a humbling experience when you kind of had your mind blown and you're like, wow, like maybe I don't understand as well as I thought.
Yeah. No, I think the blowing of the mind can be framed into, there's different frames of reference, right? I mean, there's the complete ego dissolution, which which is the ultimate is what we're seeking for. But what I've come across in my experience and a lot of the readings and people that I've talked to is that there's usually some sort of steps, right? You get your ego dissolved or blown in a certain framework or up until a certain point, right? A lot of people I think have experienced something like this in the last few years as regards to what the government tells them and what like this sort of things, right? Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. But a lot of people had their frameworks completely destroyed.
Yes.
Is it an ego thing? Yes, to some extent, right? Because that's a part of the ego that makes up our sort of our societal ego, you can say, right? Our belief in the government, our belief in society, our belief that is right. So in my case, there was several different things. Like one was my ego that was associated with science. That was the only thing I really believed at the time. And so from that string theory thing, it sort of destroyed that part of my ego, which I'm like, okay, so what is the actual truth then? And that opened doors for seeking for truth elsewhere and other parts that's not related to science. And then,
so where did you start seeking?
Well, at the point, at that moment, I was actually very lost. So I was not actually even seeking consciously. I was just bouncing from one thing to another. So drugs, love, I was married, experiences, travel. Travel is a really good thing to blow bits of your ego here and there. And it's very fun to do as well. And yeah, I got into scuba diving. I'm actually a scuba diving instructor. And for the first time in my life, I had to be conscious of my breath. Because in order to stay at one level, you have to be really, really conscious of how you're breathing. And that had a huge effect and just got me into these sort of breathwork practices without any sort of spiritual backbone to it, but it started changing me as well. But really, so I was not actually seeking until I was about 27 years old. And
so you started doing these breathing exercises, and what you just like noticed that it happens to have like very profound effects on you, or?
At that point, no. At that point, I was just still lost. I was just doing things because it was cool and it felt good.
Sure.
There's no deeper point behind anything. There was no meaning in my life. I was just bouncing from one thing to another, from one experience to the next. It was very experiential based. So, but at the moment I realized I can actually have experiences that are like deeper than what I was used to up until that point. So yeah, for me, it was just seeking the better, deeper, cooler experience. And I didn't think about these things as spiritual or I was just trying
And
to have fun.
did that change at some point?
Yes, and so when I was about 27, actually, I moved to Barcelona with my ex-wife, and I was very lost. I was drinking a lot. I didn't know what the hell I was doing there. I didn't speak Spanish, and kind of just but I had a lot of time myself, and somebody recommended me this book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I'm sure everybody's heard of it by now, a very famous book. And yeah, I started reading this book, and the first 10 pages, I gotta say, I don't remember exactly which passage it was, but I had the first consciousness shift experience when I'm basically sober and in the middle of the day. And just reading this book, when he's talking about his own experience and how his mind was basically blown, and he experienced this ego dissolution. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work, but yeah.
So I guess for someone who's not familiar, like ego dissolution is kind of the idea that, well, I might not explain it correctly, so correct me by all means, but it's like the idea that there's the thoughts in your head, and there's this like idea of yourself that exists, and then there's like your kind of awareness and your consciousness outside of that. And so there's this big thing, this construct inside your head that you think is you, but actually this is a thing called the ego that you have kind of crafted and accepted, and then the true you is outside of that ego. And so ego dissolution or death would be breaking down this whole like construct, this like arbitrary idea of who you are and what's going on, and kind of directing your awareness and experience to the observer or your actual consciousness. Is that kind of accurate too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's just some background for someone who maybe hasn't heard of that. But yeah, so you're saying reading this book somehow triggered that in you?
Yeah, reading that book didn't maybe dissolve anything at that moment, but reading about Eckhart Tolle's dissolution, right? Because his story is quite fascinating. He was depressed, stuck in a very bad space, and then one time at night he woke up and he had this thought: I can't live with myself any longer. And then he had this realization that if I can live with myself, then there's got to be two of me, which can't be. So therefore, there's only one of those that's real. And that realization triggered the process of ego dissolution. And it was just, I was reading it for the first time and completely amazed by this, right? And he didn't study spirituality before. He didn't have any sort of spiritual backbone. So it was very relatable, this book. And it was kind of the place where I was at the same time. I was sick, I was kind of depressed. I didn't know what the hell I'm doing with my life. Everything was meaningless. And so this book resonated with me on such a deep level that, I remember reading a paragraph, just an introduction somewhere, and just the way it's written. And I looked up from the book into the window where there was some trees there, and I really felt the trees. I really saw the trees for the first time. I didn't just see a label, that's a tree, and those are leaves. I actually experienced the tree in a completely different way, and everything started changing. So I read this book, and I really, for the first time, started experiencing this dimension of myself that's deeper than the thought process. And I started noticing that. Because
is it kind of like there was like maybe like a veil in front of your eyes before, and that fell away or something like that?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah, I think it's a very personal experience in terms of description of it. But yeah, it's like we are awake right now talking, but then there's actually states of being where we're even more awake than that, right? And for me, the biggest analogy was like, okay, so we can be sleeping and then you wake up, right? So there's a difference between your consciousness when you're sleeping and when you're in an awakened state. But then for me, that was my regular consciousness on one level. And then I had the awakening experience where I'm like, wow, I'm actually so much more awake than I was just a few seconds ago. So
So did that make you feel like before you were kind of like on autopilot or something like that, and now you're actually like examining what you're doing? Is that fair to say?
Yes, yes. I mean, this was a very, very beginning
Okay.
of my spiritual process, and it was quite like so many things happened since then. So it's kind of hard to put like words on everything.
Yeah,
but
I'm not trying to put words into your mouth. I'm just trying to kind of like draw a connection from my own experiences to yours. But
yeah,
so
basically for me, the biggest experience in my life was that something else is out there, and there's actually like there's so much more to this experience of this being that I am, of this life, than that I've ever known up until the age of 27. And so for me, that was just that was another kind of mind-blowing moment where it was another realization that there's just so much more to this than I know, that I'm used to. And from this realization, that's when I consciously started seeking. I'm like, okay, spirituality, that's the thing. People actually do this. So these hippies, they had they're onto something. And yeah, this is when I just basically started reading books. I started taking yoga classes. I got into, started meditating. I'm like, when I want something, I'm very meticulous about it. And that's why I was an engineer before. And so I'm like, okay, spirituality, and that's the thing. What do I do?
So did you start kind of researching like in many different ways, like methodically?
Oh yeah. I'm like, what can I do? Okay, people are doing yoga, but what is the most spiritual kind of yoga? All right, Kundalini yoga, let's go. And I managed to screw myself up in the process. I was really doing some things that I should not have been doing because of this, because I didn't have a teacher, I didn't have a guide. I just had my curiosity.
Like you messed yourself up like physically or spiritually?
Energetically. Doing too many practices that my nervous system was not prepared for in the slightest. And actually resulted in an actual brain trauma and actual damage that still, like even today, I'm not fully recovered. But it taught me a very valuable lesson.
Would you warn people about like being careful with this kind of practice, or like?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it's if you're going into things, meditation and is fine, but if you start getting into energy practices, and especially like things like Kundalini yoga, things that require some hardcore pranayama, and basically anything that you're working with energy, you have to be prepared. I was not prepared at all. I never really did any yoga at all. My body was not prepared. My mind was not prepared. So suddenly I started going to daily classes and just messing around with this energy. And then that actually resulted in a Kundalini awakening, where in mid-meditation, sporadically, this energy just raised up from basically my sacral chakra all the way into my head, and I couldn't contain it. And it resulted in a super traumatic experience.
So can you like describe that a bit for someone who maybe doesn't really understand so much about, I mean, if this is like difficult to talk about or you don't want to share, we can pass that too, but.
No, that's fine. I mean, at this point it's completely okay. If you asked me like even 5 years ago, it would have been still difficult to talk about it. But this is something that I've been really working hard to fix, raking myself for an entire year, every day, twice, and just doing lots of other things to sort of regain that balance that I lost. But basically, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Kundalini energy, but basically it's the same concept as Qi, as in Qigong, and from the Taoist philosophy, or prana, if you're looking into other Indian practices. But basically it's the underlying energy that we have in us. But the Kundalini yoga practice is very specifically tailored to take this energy that's usually is just stored in the first or maybe second chakras in our bodies, and to raise it up. Because once we have this energy up in the seventh chakra, then we are activated, right? And a lot of people, I think, can think that Kundalini awakening is just one of the ways of the awakening, like one of the realizations, but it's not really the case. I think it's kind of like the physical energetic component of the awakening experience, but without necessarily some of the other components that are there.
Okay. And then a question I have is, so when you talk about this energy, like, is this supposed to be an energy that's associated specifically with humans, or specifically with all living things, or like all creation entirely?
Well, absolutely, it's the energy that's associated with the creation entirely, but the way we go about using it is different between even animals and humans, right? We have different dynamics, and we have specific energy centers as humans that this energy kind of operates in, right? So there's I'm not entirely actually sure is the chakra system. It's the easiest system for us to visualize in, but it's probably more complex than this. But the Chinese don't have the
Sure.
The chakra
It's
system.
like it's a model of understanding.
Exactly. It's a model. It helps us to wrap our heads around it. But
okay. So yes, I just
yeah.
wanted to clarify that about the energy. So then continue. So you were saying like,
and so there's according to yogic philosophy, there's three strands of this energy, and it kind of like a DNA coil. It goes up from our base to our top, essentially.
and so you were saying, and you were attempting kind of without guidance to raise that.
Right. So yeah, there's different pranayama exercises in Kundalini yoga that channel that work with different energy centers of the body, and using the breath are used to just unleash energy into them, right, or drive energy onto them. And the whole purpose is to raise this energy, to drive it upwards. And but the trick is your nervous system has to be prepared. You have to be prepared, because it's a tremendous amount of energy that we are not used to. Most people are not, unless you're a very avid yoga practitioner, and probably that's not even enough, And if I had a guru or even a decent teacher, he would have told me that, you shouldn't even attempt this type of yoga until at least 4 years of practicing regular, like hatha yoga, and like for 4 years, like 4 or 5 years before you should attempt it. But
so then you had some success, like in a sense, like in the sense that you raised the energy, but so you're saying that had like actually kind of a traumatic effect.
I had too much success. So the way that it works is like this. Every day, after class, I felt great. Like I did feel a lot of, like, I felt very much connected. I was very energetic. My sleep was great. So those were all kind of short-lived effects of this day, kind of daily practice. I felt like I'm on top of my game. So that was really nice. But this one time, I just sat there to meditate at my home, and I actually did smoke a little bit of weed before as well. So I think that's what really screwed me, because I'm quite sensitive as well to cannabis. Anyway, so I smoked a little bit of weed, and I sat there meditating, and I just went to some places where I didn't know, like I've never been there before, and I was like, I was trying to explore these spaces that are kind of hard to describe, because it was beyond thoughts, it was like energetic exploration. And then I felt this feeling of, it was almost like physical, like a really, really deep orgasmic feeling in my lower belly. And something in me was able to let go. Because up until that time, there was a resistance. So for 27 years of my life, like maybe if I came close to it, there was an automatic resistance. But this time I was able to notice this resistance and completely let go of it. And the resulting thing started out as an orgasm, like an actual feeling of an orgasm. But it was like one of these energetic Taoist orgasms without, ejaculation. And then this crazy just energy just felt like a fire hose went off in my lower belly and just exploded all the way up to the top of my head, just like through my whole body. It was the most intense experience I ever had, you know, and it was orgasmic and it was beautiful and it was just completely, yeah, very humbling experience that was followed by probably 30 seconds or so of pure bliss and abiding in truth. And it's hard to, you know, we can talk about these things, but they're ultimately labels. But I could see how everything operates. I could see that my whole, I was actually able to see my whole ego, and I really understood at that moment how it's kind of just the vision I had, because there's no words, was that it's like this big black ball that is the fear of death, on which everything else is built, whether it's thoughts or ideas or whatever, you know, like personality, and even the distance between thoughts, or the separation between thoughts, this walls that's made out of the same substance. And I was able to saw that, and I was crying, and somehow I realized like the true nature of myself, essentially. I really saw that. And it was the most blissful, joyful, like pure ecstasy state. And that lasted for some time. Maybe it was half a minute, maybe it was longer, maybe it was shorter, I don't know. And then at one point, and this is where I really wish that was not high at the time, because the mind turned on, and it was like, what? Wait a second, what's going on here? Up until this point, there was no mind at all. So for about 2 minutes, I was in this state, not a single thought. It was just all these visions and realizations, and yeah, absolutely beautiful experience. So then the mind turned on, and was like, what the hell is going on? What is happening to you? You're going insane. You're losing your mind. And from this place of bliss, I was thrown into a state of sheer terror, like pure terror, like the scariest, you know, experience I ever had. Because the ego could sense, like, and everything was starting to vibrate also at the same time, right?
So it's kind of like you said earlier, that you let go, and then it sounds like that process is reversing, like the mind is like clutching and grabbing back on. Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly what happened. And so I couldn't go through that. I couldn't let go of the way, right? My mind was not prepared. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know it was a Kundalini awakening. You know, I was just sitting there doing this stuff. All this information came afterwards. So my mind, as hard as it could, just tried to grasp for straws and to go back to the place where it started. And it was the most traumatic experience like I've had in my life. And mixed into it, it was just all this energy that was involved. And so the resultant energy actually got stuck kind of in my right part of my head. And I came out of this experience, I was severely dissociated. And I had a ringing in my ears, and I couldn't focus. And
so dissociated here, does that mean like you kind of like, you felt like you were outside of yourself a little bit? There's actually and again, I figured this out later. So there's a disorder, a psychological disorder called depersonalization derealization disorder. It took me a long time to find it. And it's a very peculiar thing, because they didn't talk about it until about 2010s, right? So it's a pretty recent phenomena that they discovered, or like late 2000s or something like that. And that is what I was left with. I felt like I'm not real. I felt like I'm living in a movie. I felt like the world is two-dimensional, and I felt like I don't exist, but not in a cool spiritual way. I just felt like everybody's there, but I'm not. So I got stuck between being in like an ego in this reality, and taking this step to kind of get rid of the ego. And it was kind of this midway point.
which is fascinating, by the way. Like, I've come to realize that there's forums on this disorder. People have no idea what the hell happened to them, but it was a Kundalini issue. It's a Kundalini energy issue, and I tried to help some of these people. The problem is, people don't take you seriously when you start talking these concepts with these people. But yeah, I was completely derealized. My life fell apart. I couldn't focus. Basically, I had nerve damage as a result of that experience. I couldn't work. My marriage fell apart. I was a wreck.
Well,
yeah.
So how did you end up coming out of that?
Well, the first step was actually trying to figure out like what the hell is wrong with me. That was the hardest part. And this state, by the way, it was like it's very hard. Even now, it's like the state is a different state of being entirely. So even now, like recollection of this, I remember what I did, but I don't remember how it was exactly, because I was just a completely different state of being. It's like being in a different reality. So memory can't really tell the full story. But the first step was to figure out that yes, there's depersonalization, derealization disorder, and other people have it too. So I spent a lot of time on these forums trying to figure out. And at this point, I had no idea that this was a Kundalini thing. I mean, I kind of tried. I knew that this was probably related, but I had no idea. And it was only probably 3 months or 4 months after the incident happened that I came across a website called the Mudrasham Institute of Spirituality or something like that, that described a Kundalini disorder symptom. And it was like a paragraph that described my state, like word to word. And so I dropped everything I was doing. Like, I reached out to this guy who was running the website, George. John knows him as well. And it was funny because he didn't reply to me for like a day, and I went crazy trying to find his personal phone number, right? I like did the who is searches and all
this is
things.
because like the way he described it, as soon as you read that, you somehow knew.
I need like, this guy might have solutions. He might have something. And up until this point, just to give you an idea, I tried, like there was people trying to how do you say it, excommunicate spirits from my body. I tried past life regressions. I tried all sorts of Reiki. Like, basically I was doing different healings like 3 times a week. I was just trying everything. And one thing that would make me feel better was Reiki. I would feel a little bit better for about 2 days, and then I would get back into the baseline state.
So I'm curious, did you ever try like prayer or attending like church services or anything like that in there as well? Was that one of the things you tried?
So this is the intricacies of this state, is that you're depersonalized and derealized. Anything devotion related is unfathomable in that state. You don't have any emotions. You can't feel for something. You can't like you're not there. There's I don't know if it makes sense. It's very hard to explain, but
so that was like a barrier in front of you.
Kind of, yes. It was like you're just completely disconnected from anything, including your own emotions. And at the moment too, I was going through a divorce that was also sparked by this incident, and I just remember being so dead. Like, I knew that on some level I was completely just devastated and heartbroken because it was like the love of my life. But on another level, I didn't feel anything, and it was really scary.
Yeah, it would be, right?
And I just remember every once in a while there would be like, I would have these brief moments where I would like surface. It almost felt like, you're out of breath and you surface for air, and it feels amazing. And it happened maybe a couple of times where like there were this very short-lived instances where I'm like, okay, everything is real again. But then what happened was this pain of the divorce, of the heartbreak would kick in. But I was happy to feel it because it was feeling something, and it was better than the place where I was before. Yes,
no, I've had depression, which was very different in nature to what you're describing, but it was a similar kind of thing where it's like, well, when it's like being numb is way worse than feeling bad.
Right. So,
Right.
so to answer the question, yeah, like it was absolutely not, it was not possible to experience anything, even remotely devotional or prayer or anything like that, because it was completely not part of my reality. Like it was
Okay.
much easier
So
to
then,
experience the cosmos.
so then the
And
practices you were doing in attempt to fix it were more physical practices, or
well, I was really seeking help.
yeah.
Actually, one thing that kind of helped me out was the TRE. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's a technique. I don't remember who developed it, but it's basically releasing trauma from your body through trying to get it to shake, essentially. You put yourself in these uncomfortable positions, and the theory is that all the trauma is stored in our body, and if we just start shaking, we release this trauma, right? While breathing and by doing this thing. That kind of seemed to work. Reiki seemed to a little bit to work, but at the same time, it did seem like it was getting worse. Like I felt like I'm losing my mind more and more. Like I'm really becoming more out of touch and losing touch with reality, essentially.
And so then you found this teacher.
So then I found this guy and got a hold of him, and he's like, "How the hell did you get my number?" I'm like, "Well, I was sorry about this. I went a little bit crazy." But he said, "Send me a picture. I want to take a look at you." I'm like, "You mean like a physical picture?" He's like, "Yeah, send me a physical like a photo." And so I emailed him a photo, and he goes, "Oh, yep, your Kundalini is there's an issue. The three Kundalini strands, they disconnected at this basically sixth chakra, and you are going insane. And if you don't do anything about it, you're just going to lose touch with reality." And this was exactly what I was feeling. And on one hand, I was scared shitless because he just confirmed what I was feeling, which was like I'm losing touch with reality. But on the other hand, okay, so somebody actually knows what's wrong with me. Like, can we do something about this? And his response was, "Yeah, we can fix this, but you're going to lose a lot of the spiritual progress you've made up until that point." So, but my position, it was not, that was the only thing I wanted, is to feel reality again. And I'm like, all right, how do you fix it? So we had a Skype meeting, and in real time, he had me close my eyes. He did some things. The guy's an energy worker. And then I opened my eyes, and everything was three-dimensional again, that was my first memory after he fixed me. It was like, wow, everything is three-dimensional.
Was it kind of like that when it happened?
Pretty much.
Wow.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there was reality again, but at the same time, there was so much trauma and damage from
right. I mean, you still have to deal with that, but at the same time, so there was a fundamental shift. And how did, like you were saying, just kind of energy work, you're using these words, but like what actually was the trigger in your memory that kind of like reopened your eyes or brought you back inside of yourself? What was it?
Well, it's just like it's a very subtle energetic shift. It's kind of hard to put a word in.
But like, does he? So was when he was helping?
Like feeling of lightness, like feeling of like I'm more in touch with something, like some sort of barrier lifted, right?
And did you have to do anything during this, or were you just kind of sitting there?
I was just sitting there. I was just sitting there with my eyes closed.
Wow. So how do you account for someone being able to do that and affect you in such a way?
Well, at this point, I'm beyond trying to account for any of these things, man. It's, you can call it magic, you can call it being in touch, you can call it the universe. I think they're all the same things. Like now, it's just some people have the gift, and now past that experience. This was 7 years ago that he got me out of that. And then I spent time in ashrams. I spent a lot of time studying, these sort of energetic states. And now I am completely okay with not having any answers, because the questions are gone. So this is my way of accounting for any of this, is that now it's not a thing anymore. I'm no longer a seeker because I don't have questions. I might not have the answers, but there's no questions to ask. So there's not really any problem, you could say. So yeah, it's just that there are things out there and we can't wrap our little minds around it. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. But
it's interesting perspective, and I can see how that must be like very liberating.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was that's the most liberating thing, you know, when we talk about enlightenment or awakening or realizations and all these other things. Those are all ideas, right? But you know, the actual states that people are describing that they're in, it's an entirely different thing, right? It can be the biggest disappointment, according to a lot of writers, because it's not at all what we're seeking. But in my case, the moment came where the questions kind of disappeared. So there's no more questions. There's things that are fun, there's things that are interesting, there's things that are exciting, but it's not like, oh, I need to know, because we can't. We don't.
Yeah. So then since then you've been like consistently practicing like yoga or energy work or that kind of stuff? Is that been like something that you've practiced and kept part of your life since 7 years ago?
Yeah. I mean, I spent some time, I spent several years in India. I lived in ashrams. I have a meditation practice that I've kept up for, 8 years. And it's just sort of deepening into the experience.
And so what were you trying to accomplish or achieve, or what like, for example, maybe you're fixed, you could just go like live your life or whatever. So why did you keep pursuing and practicing this kind of
curiosity? It's something like, I've always been a person, I never really had a very concrete set goal in life. I was never one of those people like, oh, I want a career and I want to get married, all these things, right? Exploration was always an interesting thing for me. I mean, I did drugs because I was curious. I like traveling.
Yeah, I find it very interesting how in a lot of things, it's like, from my perspective, a lot of what you guys say about like the universe and the way it's like it aligns with Christianity, but Christians call it like God's will. Sure. And it's like, well, God's will is always correct, and and things are going to work out. Like we do have some free will. We can make choices, and those choices have effects. But in the end, it is down to the universe. Yeah. But I feel like the difference there, though, is that we attribute personhood in some form and like a definite will to the universe. Do you, the open question for both of you guys, like, do you believe that the universe has like a directed will of some kind, or is it more just like kind of randomness that is going to resolve itself in some way?
Andrey.
I mean, I can go on about this for hours, but I feel like John, you haven't said anything. So maybe
I mean, like for me, the honest answer is I don't know. I try to find my place within my understanding of the universe, and I guess try and manipulate it in some form or another. But I just don't know if there's some grander will or not that's kind of directing the whole process, or if there is free will, or to what degree that free will is, if that is there. I mean, I just do things based on how I feel, based on my intuition, and then just kind of judge it from there. But again, from a grander perspective, I just don't know.
That's right, and we did talk about that as well in a previous podcast, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think, Andrey?
Well, I see it. So I think a lot of these conversations, when we think about will, like the idea of will, take a lot of times takes into account like trying to get to something, to some objective, or like there's something besides just the will, right? There's other maybe thoughts or likes or dislikes.
Yeah, or it's like kind of, we want like, go this way, don't go this way.
Exactly.
Right.
So what I see it is more of an unraveling moment to moment. There's not a point to which God or universe or whatever is trying to get to. It's kind of like a flower is growing. I mean, or a tree is growing. Like, yeah, it's a natural process and it happens. But well, maybe the flower is growing is not really a good example because it's very limited compared to God,
Sure.
or because that's an infinite concept. An infinite concept, there cannot be sort of destinations, right? It's just a moment to moment. It's a force. It's love. It's unraveling. And it happens as it happens. And so I don't think that it's trying to go somewhere. Like the idea of will, I think it's you can look at it as will, but it's infinitely more than that. Because
would you say that the previous moment influences the next moment, or is it just going again as it's going to go?
The previous moment, I think it does unravels, right? So it builds on what's unraveled in the previous moment. But even the idea of time, I think, is we need it because we are, like we live in these dimensions and we have this limited brain and stuff. But I think when we're talking about big ideas like this, and we're talking about God, I think it's erroneous to assume that God operates on the idea of time as well, just because we do. Because I don't think that's the case.
God is outside time, no doubt.
So when we're talking about things like will and stuff, yeah, you could say it's a will, but I think it's a limited. Using that word limits potential understanding of what is actually happening.
Yeah, well, it's paradoxical in a way.
Absolutely.
Many Orthodox Christian concepts are paradoxical, and I find that to be one of the reasons why I've accepted it as the truth, is because like the truth is paradoxical, right? And if someone like gives you an answer that's you can totally understand, then it's not the correct answer, right?
That's right.
And so I find it very impressive that Orthodoxy admits this freely to be the case. At the same time, paradoxes can still like be complete nonsense, or they can kind of like make sense in a weird intuitive way. So I'm kind of curious, Andrey, you said that you kind of let go of like the questions a little bit. So you don't have the answers, but you also don't have the questions. So I'm kind of curious about in that case, like how do you derive like the guiding principles of your life and your behavior? Is it like intuition purely, or how do you go about that, given that you said you're not really a seeker per se anymore?
Yeah, so spontaneity. There's a lot of spontaneity in my life, and this whole process happened in stages. Of course, like I kind of took the nuclear bomb to my mind very early on, but after that, it took there was years of internal seeking and experiments and stuff like that, and experiences. So now at this point, it's like I don't know what's gonna I was telling this to somebody. I don't know if I'm gonna brush my teeth in the morning. Like I wake up in the morning, I don't know that. It always actually ends up happening that I indeed do brush my teeth, but I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. So, and it's like this every day. So it's at this point where there's no guiding morals or for my life. Of course, there's things like I run a couple of businesses and things like that. Like it's a different story, although I try to take this framework into everything. But
I'm kind of interested in like so I'm not trying to say like there's an argument some Christians make that it's like, well, if you don't have God's rules and you just do whatever you want, nothing, I think that's very overly simplistic. So I'm not just trying to accuse you of this, but I'm curious that like,
look, yeah. I think God has instilled us with these rules. And the best, happiest, most efficient way for us to live is to embody these rules in our being, as opposed to put them in our head and to use them as a filter for every decision that we make. Is it in accordance with God's rule or not? If we completely embody these rules, if we completely are in touch with the present moment, with the universe, with God, then we don't need to think about anything. Like I don't need somebody to tell me not to kill or not to steal or not to do whatever, because it's just something that I'm probably just not going to do. And again, I say probably because there can also always be some crazy ass situation, right? You could be, in the mall and somebody's like, and then it's like, well, you do that. So again, having any sort of rules or beliefs, I think, is a detriment to God, because God is limitless. And so anytime we put a rule in place or a belief in place, we're essentially trying to limit the infinite. And so we're trying to tell God what to do. But
isn't it useful to have a model? It's like we talked about models a little bit before. It's like
absolutely. It is useful to have a model, but it's kind of like
how else do we get there, right? Like, because what you say, I agree that it's like 100%. it is baked into us, right? But obviously, because of sin in the Christian view, we are not there. We are not correctly aligned, and we have lost that kind of discernment, through ego, through whatever.
See, the problem is here is that I believe that the path forward is inwards, right? And there is a very huge help to have morals and guidelines on a societal level, especially when people are at the different stages of their growth and their path. And and if you believe in ideas like reincarnations and that sort of thing, that you don't know how many lifetimes a person has lived and what. Anyways, so there are certain one-size-fits-all solutions that are extremely beneficial to us on a societal level, because obviously we still have a ton of problems today in the world, and places like churches or mosques or temples, they can be extremely beneficial, and they can definitely take you to a certain place. But it's just like, if you want to climb Mount Everest, or Mount Everest is a bad example, but any other mountain, you start slowly, and you got all these trails there, and you got all these nice signs and stuff, right? But then as you advance, there's fewer and fewer trails, fewer and fewer people, and eventually, if you want to get to the top, you have to drop all trails and you start climbing yourself, right? And at this point, you're basically disregarded all maps. You're looking at the stars. There's no maps. There's no maps to go there. So all of these things are extremely beneficial. It's just that it's just tools, right? And which tools do you use for the job? I used a lot of tools in my journey, to get to the place where I'm currently at, where maybe the tools I'm using are different and a little bit more specific to what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to, how I'm trying to be energetically. But there's tremendous benefits to things like morals. But let me just say one more thing. Like, I don't know if you guys ever taken like a poetry writing class in high school or something like that, but one of my teachers told me there's certain rules to poetry, or like jazz music, also the same thing, right? And you have to learn the rules to know when to break them later on, right? That's what true genius in poetry or jazz music is, right? When you take all these rules that all these people come before you, and then you break one or you break another one. So you need to understand the rules in order how to break them properly as well. So there's a lot of things happening there.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting and very correct way of describing things as well, because Orthodoxy it functions in that way you're describing, because it's like, well, there's the rules, but following Christ is not just the rules, right? Like, that's like the start, right? And then like you got to start doing that before you can do anything else. And then once you start to get a little bit better at that, you can get more and more serious about like your prayer activities and what have you, and about really kind of unifying your will to God's will, further and further, and to the point that I thought it was funny that you used the description of climbing a mountain, because Mount Athos is like the most famous center of Orthodox monasticism, and it's just as you say there. Like, that's where the most spiritually advanced Christians are. And, at the end of the day, like there's like one or two elders, in seclusion on a mountain somewhere there who are like doing pretty crazy stuff with prayer.
For sure.
But then, if you're not up to that point, then you're not going to be able to benefit from that. So then obviously Eastern religions also have, or Eastern practices, maybe I shouldn't say religions exactly, but they also have that exact same thing, right? They have like elusive, hermit masters or whatever. So do you think are you of the view that these are different roads to the same thing and that they're kind of equally valid just depending on the person?
100, 1000%. The truth is only one. God is only one, and we, in our very limited language and mental capacity with our different cultures, Eastern cultures, Western cultures, all these things, we sense that there's something there. We are just trying to charter the territory and then create signposts and create systems in place to get there that is, works best for us. So that's why there's so many religions out there, right? It's like, because there's so many people out there, so many different languages, and everybody's different. But God is one. And that's just, the truth is one, and I use these words kind of interchangeably because for me, that's kind of what it means. But yeah, everybody's trying to get to the same mountaintop, 100%.
But not all the tools are going to work either, right?
Well, depending, again, right? All the tools are going to work in different stages. So the question is what you want to do, right? A lot of people go and they go to a monastery, right? Or they sit in a cave and meditate, like Tibetan monks, or they seek seclusion. That's very different paths, because that's kind of one of it's the purest path, right? You don't have to interact with the world too much. You don't have to worry about all those other things, and you don't have to wrap this framework into other aspects of your life, because you go to sit in a cave for a while. Now try to be enlightened and have a family and kids and try to do something. It's an entirely different thing, right? Because now you're in much less control of anything. It's not just your mind that you're trying to figure out, like you're trying to figure out how to do this and how to do everything around you at the same time. So there's tools for that. And of course, there's different values, right, in society. So until we have any sort of values, until we have anything that, like, we still want to have a family, we still want to do something in the real world, we still want to help out others on their path. When these things are in place, tools are needed because, well, you're interacting with something that is not just that's not spiritual in essence, although of course everything is ultimately God. But here is what, different techniques do different things, right? So for example, there's Eastern meditation practices, right? And then there's things like yoga, there's things like pranayama, there's things like prayer, like the one you're talking. They're all trying to get to the same place,
right? And
taking different ways.
So I'm curious to go into that a little bit, because I practiced meditation in the past a pretty healthy amount, like almost only mindfulness breathing meditation. I'm not sure the terminology, but just the kind where you center yourself on your breath and you let your thoughts, dissipate.
Sure.
And so what I always felt from that, like it made me feel good. It made me feel better. But I kind of felt like what was happening there was I was emptying myself. And then now I've been exploring like prayer in the Orthodox tradition, which is very different from like a lot of, Protestant, like freestyle kind of asking God for what you want kind of prayer. It's actually about repeating, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, like many, many, many times. And then when you get deep into
meditation is what you're referring to.
Right. So I think there's some distinguishing elements a little bit, but then that also comes in together with like breathing practices as well. But so then to me, when I look at those two side by side, I say, okay, well, meditation empties yourself, but then practicing that together with the Jesus prayer, then is an attempt to fill yourself with Christ
Right.
in
Well,
what you have emptied.
well,
Like,
I
yeah.
see what you're saying. What you're talking about is actually, as far as the meditation you did, is a very basic. There's different meditations out there that again serve different tools, and the basic sort of object is the breath meditation, is the meditation that serves to train the mind for some other specific things, right? And what you're describing and where you are in the there's many different levels of this meditation, right? And it's true that the very first level, you are basically emptying, right? You're emptying your mind, you're emptying the thoughts. The benefits and the feeling, the sense that something is coming into you and actually being filled with God's love and all those things, that comes at much later stages, right? So this is not something that you can force with this type of meditation, right? Because this one is just training the mind. It's just training the mind and it's training to abide in the space that's beyond the mind. There's actually a really great book that I recommended to John called The Mind Illuminated, that does an amazing job describing these stages.
I've encountered that book before. Yeah, I don't think I finished it, but it was very interesting.
So this is just this type of meditation, right? There's many other types of meditations, like mantra meditations, which is essentially, I think, what you described with prayer, which then actually takes this, and instead of just training the mind, the point of this meditation is to utilize your emotions, right? It's this idea of bhakti, right? In Indian tradition, it's a devotional meditation. And now it's not just emptying the mind; it's about filling yourself and then dissolving the ego through offering it to something grander than yourself, right? And India is a fascinating country because you can make a god out of anything. It's 33,000 gods in the Hindi tradition. A lot of people have like a tree in the backyard that they think is holy for some reason. So somebody could go out there and they would literally pray to the tree, and it would have the same effect as a Westerner praying to God, because to them, they can actually do that. Western mind, Western heart is much.
Does it have the same effect though?
It does, because it doesn't matter what it's all God anyways. But to them, they grew up in this village. They don't know any better. They think that this is our problem, is that we have too much information. They don't have this information. So it's whatever you can evoke emotions, whatever makes you very emotional, whatever makes you very like.
So I would say that, so just exploring some of the difference here, the Jesus prayer is not meant to invoke emotion in an emotional state. That is not the goal. So maybe you're just using the word emotional a little differently. I'm not sure.
Yes, I think so. It's not that like, I mean, if you can get to the point where you can actually evoke this deep sense of love in yourself, I think your meditations would jump like levels in intensity and benefit. But of course, it's not emotion in the sense that it has to be like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, it's knowledge that something is greater ourselves, and the certainty, and consciously relinquishing the ego to this. For you, it's Jesus Christ,
Mm-hmm.
And that works on the subconscious level.
But so this is also a different paradigm though, because it's like, I find this interesting about Orthodoxy is that distinctly, like, God is in a tree because, God is in all creation. God is in us because we are also part of all creation. However, humans are inherently different from a tree, and we are actually holier than trees, and we have a higher purpose than trees do. Therefore, it would be wrong to submit yourself in the way you're describing to a tree rather than to God.
Again,
God the Creator.
I'm describing it this way. I don't know if you've ever been to India, but no. It's yes.
Exaggeration, maybe.
That's the problem, because this is that's why they call it the most spiritual country in the world and stuff. Is because this idea of spirituality and sort of this openness to everything, like, is ingrained in everything. And so it was just like, it's not that they pray to a tree. It's just for them this idea that, you know, kind of God is in everything and everything is holy is so strong. Like we can't actually comprehend it. Like I lived there for 5 years. I can't really comprehend it, but it's amazing that they can do this. Like their ability to lose themselves and like the denseness of the ego in India is just lighter by orders of magnitude from a typical Western person. So for them, you don't really have to give them a lot of reasons for something to be like super holy. Like I was volunteering at an ashram, and there's a temple there, and Indians would come up to me and they would try to bow down and kiss my feet sometimes. And I was, I was like, what are you doing? You're like, I'm just this regular dude volunteering here. Why are you like doing this devotion thing to me? But for them, it's very easy. But I mean, that's a different conversation anyways. The point I was simply trying to make is that if you believe in something and you make this a point of your meditation, it's different than making your breath the object of your meditation.
Right. Well,
because it's an emotional response.
Yeah. And I mean, you're like, okay, so where I find myself really kind of disagreeing though, is that it seems like this arbitrary nature of worship, like the object of worship, that seems like it should not be arbitrary.
Well, the thing is with worship, you can't, if you wanted to make it arbitrary, you can only worship things that you believe in. That's what I'm trying to make, right? So you, of course, like you can't worship something that you're not 100% sincere about. And the point I was simply trying to make is that it's very easy for Indians to sincerely worship just whatever, That's why the British were able to take them.
Well, yeah,
it's 1,000 soldiers. Like
it's fascinating. It's a fascinating concept.
So for you is Jesus Christ, right? And this is the thing that you believe is
right. But that comes also packaged in inherently with certain other things, because the other thing about the Jesus prayer, for example, is it's not just like a person, and it's not just a sentence either, right? It's like the deep understanding of the nature of Jesus Christ and what he exhibited Absolutely. And reflected, and that is very specific in his case, right? And he's made a lot of very specific claims. It was reported to do a lot of very specific things. And it's very clear if you study him that like the central message is like self-sacrifice for the love of others, right? And so if that is like at the center of your super in-deep contemplation and practice, as opposed to not being there, I feel like that's going to have very different spiritual effects.
I see completely what you're saying, and I think what's happening here again is the difference of Western mind, because for you these concepts are needed. Otherwise, this is something you resonate with, and for you, it's not just it's something that resonates with your understanding of God, and it understands with your understanding of reality and what's right and wrong in the universe. And so for you, when you see all this stuff, it's easier to take all of that and be like, yes, this is it, and this is what I'm gonna pray to, and it makes absolute sense, right? We want to do things, whatever we can connect to authentically is what we want to give ourselves to, right? And so in your case, it's that, for somebody who's a devout Muslim and he resonates more with the ideas of the Quran better, and this is history, and this is family, and this is country, that also is going to be much easier to resonate with that. And in my case, actually, I think when I was married, for me, actually, this sort of devotional thing came from my ex-wife to some extent, because I mean, it really screwed me up in the end, and because I was so lost, and I had her, and she was, I she was a kind, wonderful person that I could always trust to do the right thing. So anyways, I was not praying to her, but there was this element of that in my life. You know what I mean?
Well, putting someone else's welfare above your own and working laboring on that behalf is holy. Like,
but also agreeing that, okay, so certain things, like I didn't feel like I was a great person, and I knew that she was, so I sort of trusted that she knows the right thing, even if I don't, in certain aspects. Which was like there was a lot of mistakes on my end back in the day. But when it comes down to meditation, all I'm saying is that it's simply, it may seem like it's a big deal, that we have to have these concepts and all these other things, but it's only really a big deal for the Western mind because we need these concepts in order to believe something. It's very hard to get anybody to believe in anything in the West, right? India is the opposite.
But see, here's the thing, man. I'm an Eastern Orthodox.
No, but I'm not talking about the
I'm joking there a little bit because we debate a lot East versus West in Christian circles, and Western is like Catholicism and Protestants, and we think they are very much products of Western minds because they went crazy legalistic with it, like they went crazy with the rules and stuff, and
right.
way beyond what Jesus taught and all this kind of stuff. But again, I just don't see how that's arbitrary because, for example, I think what I was saying about Christ's example.
I'm not saying it's arbitrary because it's not. It's not arbitrary to you, and you're the one doing the prayer and meditation. That's it. It's not arbitrary because you need these concepts and you need that in order.
Right. But I'm talking about outside of myself too, though, right?
So right now, I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to assume that everybody is kind of the same, right? And of course, I think that's true. But,
right, and I think it is true in a spiritual way. I do believe it is true in a spiritual way.
On a deeper level than that, we're all the same. But on a deeper level than that, we're all one. So of course, that is also.
But what's deeper than the way we live our lives? That's what we're talking about here, right?
It's true. We're all gonna die. We're all gonna join the same place.
Are we though? We don't know that. We don't know we're all gonna join the same place, or we might be in the same place, but we might feel very differently about that place.
Okay, sure. We don't know. I'm just telling how I guess experience it, because for me there's a deep knowing about this, and it's not a knowing that I read in a book or that I heard something. It's just something that that I feel, and to me that's enough. Like for me, I don't feel like I need to read books about it, or to take somebody's guidance on it. And so
I understand that because it's like you get to a point where they say about psychedelic drugs, and you touched on this earlier. When you get the message, you got to hang up the phone because if you kind of see what's going on a little bit.
There's knowledge versus there's something that there's the factual information, right? So there's the mind versus there's a deeper knowledge. And if we get good at discerning those things, then the need for knowledge kind of falls away.
Well, it's in the way that a monk or a poor old woman in a village somewhere could be way holier, and way more in tune and way more awakened and living a life of more love than someone who, spent 30 years studying and trying to figure it out. Right.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, if you take this enlightened woman and you put her into the world and you show her all these things that she's not familiar with, is that aspect of her life also going to be enlightened? Right. That's, or is she going to just realize that watching TV is great and she's going to sit there and become obsessed with soap?
Yeah, I mean, very possible. And hopefully God would protect her from that.
Right. But I mean, we just don't know. So it's all these things. There's a lot of concepts.
But just one thing, I still want to kind of ask you, so I just really want to address the concept of what you make the center of your practice and your worship, what you submit your consciousness to. Don't you think that there are bad things you could do? For example, the love of wealth and comfort and something like that.
Yeah. I think at this point, let me try to explain. At this point where I submit to is basically, it's not something specific. It's basically going away from things, from thoughts, from physical reality, and really away from the mind sphere into what I'm feeling with my heart, which there's no concepts there at all, right? If there's any concepts left, they're still in your head. It's just as simple as that, right? Because God
Right.
is beyond all concept. God is infinite. So it's actually going.
But I think you can lose yourself though and not be with God.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
That's the disagreement. That's the disagreement there. You can lose yourself. You can lose yourself if you're not conscious enough, right? You can lose yourself in meditations at the first stages because you become sleepy and your mind is not completely clear. But the whole point of meditation is to be able to lose yourself consciously. And if you lose yourself consciously, if you're still 100% aware, then there's no possible way for you to be outside of God because God permeates everything. So the only thing you can do is lose yourself to God. If you just got to get really good at losing yourself. And it's the same thing as letting go.
Well,
if
that's
you just let go. The only place you can end up is God.
it's interesting. That is interesting because it also helps me to delineate, okay, well, here's actually it's another one of the points where Orthodoxy would disagree, right? I mean, we would say that God contains everything. However, God has chosen to allow things that are not of his divine nature and of good and of light.
Right.
He allows them to exist because, we're humans, were messed up for some reason, right?
That's not a disagreement that we have, because I think everything is God's will, I guess, since we're using the terminology.
It
even
is.
the bad things, the bad things, even the
they are though. They are, but like this is one of those paradoxical things though, right? It's that like we have the choice though, man, right? Like we can choose to go do something evil randomly. And like if I did that, I'm changing the universe and I am like introducing localized evil.
All right. So the thing is, we have the choice. That's another thing, right? The choice is not black or white. A choice is kind of a gradation from we're actually conscious enough to do something, or we're unconscious and we're programmed and we're just running on autopilot, in our ego. But the paradox here is that once we get to the place where we are completely conscious, we realize that there's no I, there's no self to begin with. So it's just God manifesting itself through us. And so is it a choice? No, but is it free will? I mean, it could feel like it's free will, it feel like it's a choice, but still it's an act of God. And for me, this is sometimes actually, random prayers or mantras do come up. And one that does come often is like, God, make me an instrument of thy will. Because that's something that I resonate with very deeply. Because for me, the highest places in functioning, the highest place in consciousness, it's me letting go so fully that everything I do, everything that happens to me is an act of God. And there's no free will there. There's no me in there. So how can I have a choice? How can I have free will if there's no I? And so that's another paradox where I think this especially like Western religions fall a little bit short to really grasp the deeper nature of reality, right? I mean, they do a great job, and there's some certain subsets that kind of get closer than kind of mainstream religions, but this is one of the things with tools, right? They help you until a certain point, but then the last few steps you have to take on your own. And I think those are the last steps, right? But up until that point, yes, 100%. Everything you're saying is applicable and beneficial for the majority of people,
Yeah, no, it is interesting because you really did hone in on one of the core things where it's like, okay, for me, like I used to be very anti-free will. I used to be, especially when I was atheist, I was very, deterministic,
right.
materialistic,
Right.
like, well, we're just complex math equations, basically, right? We get input
Right.
and then output happens. And then I made a personal choice at some point, like through my experiences or whatever. I was just like, well, I think we have free will because we feel like we have free will. Like, I think I have a choice in that I do change things. Like, even though it does all resonate with, like, God can change, whatever. Like, it's like, in a crazy tapestry and we're pulling on a thread and he's got instant atomic control over the whole tapestry, but I do think that our choices, they matter and they change what happens. And that we through our actions, though, I think we can introduce things that are not in accordance with the universe. Like, I think that like it's paradoxical, like you said, but it's very personal, it's very subjective. And
right, yeah. And so this is one of the things that's kind of like how I perceive it, because yeah, I mean, I used to also, see it this way, but now it's even, everything is God's will, and everything is in accordance with the universe. The universe is the way it is, and there's no other way that it should be. So it's a lesson for something. Everything is a seed for something else. We have no idea what, like a genocide in some country might actually do in 100 years from now. We don't know what's
that is exactly God's power, though, right? Like he can turn any evil into
it's not
good.
That he can, he does.
That's what I mean. Exactly.
Of the universe unraveling.
But we can create immense suffering that needn't have existed, through our own actions.
Again, there's a Buddhist kind of like fable, and I'm gonna mess it up, but the point is that the military come to this, a friend comes to this farmer and he goes, "Hey, how's it going?" "Well, things are bad." He's like, "Well, why is it bad?" "Because they were gonna draft my son to, my son broke his leg." "Oh, that's really bad." "But actually it's really good because they came to draft him and they couldn't because he's got a broken leg." "Oh, that's great." "Well, no, actually it's bad because now the guys are taking over," and it just goes on indefinitely. So we have no idea what's good and what's not. And every time we think we know what to do and we try to want to do certain way and we pray for certain things to happen, we're telling God how to do his damn job. But who are we to do that? So the only way forward is acceptance. The only way forward is acceptance of what is, and really being in the moment and living like this. Everything else is a detriment. Everything else is trying to take this beautiful, infinite reality, nature, and trying to confine it to something that we see fit, because it's our interpretation of God's will, what is in accordance and what is not in accordance with the universe. Every time we try to say something like this, we're basically saying that we're smarter than God, and we're not.
Well, we're not smarter than God, but I do think that God gave us some pretty clear messages, and I do think that, in a way, I'm pragmatic about it. I'm like, well, hey, I just think about it like, well, hey, if everyone lived their life in service of others and out of love for others, then, we would have heaven on earth, right? Like,
but the problem with that is you can't force people to,
of course,
be of service and to be loving,
course,
right?
Of course,
the only thing you can do with these people is let them be. So that's really the only answer. If somebody is freaking out in front of you, you can beat them into submission, or you can let them be. One is going to be
right. You can let them be, but also, people are always hunting for answers. And for there's many different stages on the road, and it's like, well, maybe I can share something with other people, but I have so much to learn from other people, right? But the question is, if someone took like my advice or my guidance, they would have to be like a little kid or something for me to be able to help them. Maybe not even then, but then in comparison of, like, say, I don't know, like an ayahuasca shaman or like some kind of, esoteric guru doing his own thing in India, like they would lead that person, I would think, in very different directions. And I question whether they would truly lead to the same place or not. But
does it matter?
I do think, yeah, that is the ultimate question. And I definitely think it matters. It's pretty easy to me, but that's a tough one. It's like, people got to come to their own conclusion. You said you had to go 12:30. Do we got to let you go?
I get to run here. Get another meeting actually.
Okay, great, man. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to go up on YouTube.
Yeah, it was pretty deep, man.
Yeah, and in a week or two. It's really interesting. Thanks for introducing us, John. You got to get in there more next time, though, bro.
Yeah, for sure. The conversation was just going, and then I didn't really see a good point to enter, and I was like, okay. They got it, and then that coincided, like there's been some background noise the last 20-30 minutes, and so that's when I muted, but I really enjoyed listening to you guys, so that was good.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you go then, Andrey, but yeah, thanks so much, bro, and chat again sometime maybe.